There's a common, never-ending argument that has been festering in the manga communities around the world. Do demographics like shonen, shoujo, josei, or seinen actually matter? A discussion that can get so heated it would leave any nerdy family's Thanksgiving in quiet, boiling silence. In any one of these arguments that I've gotten into, it's almost always started with me having to explain why shoujo is so looked down upon, and then having to defend why it exists in the first place. Other times I've seen these arguments stem from statements like, Attack on Titan is too gory to be for kids, it must be a seinen, although this has much less of a gender-specific overtone than the former does. Statements like these perfectly encapsulate why, at least in the American manga community, these arguments are never going to die. There's not only a lot of misinformation that goes around, but also a sore lack of context, as well as a good old dash of misogyny. Even when someone is given correct information, the most stubbornest of Reddit or Twitter users may still insist that X romance series is a shoujo or Y action series is a shonen. Sometimes they may actually give in, but only with the caveat that Z shonen or seinen series is actually an honorary shoujo then. There is a limited scope about how the majority of the series under these demographics operate, and why the genres within them don't define them. Dare I say, a lack of media literacy. Where a lot of the context initially is lost in these arguments is what these words even mean. So while I'm sick of having to do this all the time, I know if I don't, all the comments are going to be about it. Shoujo, shonen, josei, and seinen are all indicators of demographics of manga and the magazines that they come from. Shoujo is for young girls, shonen is for young boys, josei is for adult women, seinen is for adult men. There is also another demographic that people hardly ever bring up, and that is kodomo, which is manga for young kids. Something not all too dissimilar from Sesame Street or kids shows of the like, just in book form. These demographics are, for the most part, just demographics. Marketing tools for manga publishers to easily get across the target audience that they are selling these magazines to. This isn't all though. Context matters in these discussions too. And a lack of knowledge about the actual publishing of manga in Japan, especially about shoujo manga, is lackluster at best. There are amazing books and videos about this subject all over the internet and in your libraries, but most of the average manga or anime fans are not going to be looking these up unless, you know, they happen to get the RFK Jr. brainworm like I did. God, I hope I don't start thinking the fluoride in the water is turning the frogs gay and that this is just the brainworm that makes me love shoujo manga. Only time will tell. The lack of context and knowledge leads to these debates. One side believes that demographics don't matter, they're gonna read whatever's good in the first place, meritocracy will win in the end. The other side sees an inherent value in directly addressing an underserved audience of girls and women, especially in nerdy communities like manga. And to try and help the other side understand why I am firmly on the side of we still need demographics in manga, I've decided to dive head deep into the trenches of the great demographic debate.
Objection!
Now, what I think some people who think that demographics in manga don't matter don't realize is demographics are in everything. They aren't unique to manga, or even Japan for that matter. If anything, they are just more overt about who they're selling to because of the history of manga and the country. From the ads you see, to the books you read, to the movies you watch, all of them have targeted demographics. Whether you actually fit the demographic that they are aiming for is besides the point. But to market a product or a piece of media, the company needs to get it in front of the right eyes. That's why YouTube recommended you this video. They know that you just wanted to see me so badly. That bodice ripper book that's propped up on the romance shelf at a Barnes & Noble, yeah, that would have had its cover specifically tailored to a certain audience that it is trying to cater towards. Something that had rigorous data and product testing to make sure it hit that demographic. Often, that demographic is adult women or housewives. They're not going to lace the covers with frills and bright pink bubbles because of this. It would attract the complete wrong audience to this book, and therefore the marketing would be ineffective. So instead, the book cover would probably have something darker, more sultry, maybe some roses on it. It's gotta be romantic, but there might be some smoky gray on there so you know it's dark. This also goes for movie posters. There's a reason that people kind of mock the sameness of movie posters over the years. Want to market a chick flick? Have the man and the woman posing back to back. Maybe have them flirting a little bit so you can see the characters' chemistry, but make it playful enough so it looks like a comedy. Want to market a teen sex comedy? Boobs. Don't think there's enough boobs? Okay, legs. Sexy, sexy legs. But what if you also wanted to market a sex comedy that had some horror in it and was also written by two women and it was specifically said to be geared towards a teen girl audience? You'd think that, you wouldn't add the boobs because that's not what sells to that audience, right? Well, you're wrong. I remember the first time I ever saw the trailer for Jennifer's Body. I was sitting in the local $5 theater ready to watch whatever was coming out in 2008 and was graced with sexy shots of Megan Fox. She was undressing, kissing girls, swimming in a lake naked. I was completely disinterested in whatever Superbad meets Transformers sex comedy was going on there. It didn't seem like it was catered to me, nor did it really seem like it wanted to be. So imagine my surprise when I watched this movie 15 years later and realized, damn, it's actually really good. Not only that, but also this movie was nothing remotely like how it was sold to audiences. Jennifer's Body, in the words of the screenwriter Diablo Cody, was a story about how the patriarchy can get in the way of female friendships and how toxic codependency arises in your teen years. It also touches on sexual assault, and many people have now said this movie is incredibly relevant since it's gained cult status now. Despite Cody's intentions though, this movie was not marketed to the audience that she intended it to. Instead, the movie was marketed entirely around the coveted older teen, young adult boy range. Not that people in this demographic range couldn't enjoy this movie, but the ones they were pandering to aren't exactly going to be getting a feminist horror film. The trailers and posters for Jennifer's Body all highlighted how sexy Megan Fox was. They showed off her body as much as they could, but they didn't really show off the heart of this movie. Her relationship with Amanda Seyfried's character and the dry humor that made it so campy. The posters would show Megan Fox sexily sitting on desks and slogans that would say things that made her seem so dangerous to boys. But in a sexy way, don't worry. For anyone who saw Jennifer's Body though, there was nothing sexy about the way Megan Fox was killing these dudes. Marketing isn't the only place where a target demographic is a necessity. The intended audience influences how a story is packaged, the tone, how themes are made relevant, and essentially every part of the writing process. In the case of Jennifer's Body, it's a story that portrays female friendships, rejection, queerness, and bodily changes that girls go through. Through the lens of a horror film, Cody writes a story that is strongly considering the audience for this film: young girls and young women. Through all of this mismarketing for this movie, two things were highlighted. That A, demographics, and especially in marketing, do matter. And B, media created by and for women is not taken seriously. When Cody and the movie's director, Karen Kusama, tried to fight back about this marketing because it was just completely leaving out who they intended the audience to be, they only received a now infamous email in response, which read,
I got a very memorable email from a marketing person at the studio once, where I had sent him this articulate defense of the film, and here's how it should be marketed, and I said, what specifically are you thinking? And he wrote back, Megan Fox hot. 3 words.
For cutting a trailer together?
That
or
was
just for marketing
in terms of
general?
In terms of what is the value of this film.
This movie was made for teen girls, and the studio and the marketing team could not fathom that this movie in any way should be marketed to them. Consequently, letting this movie flop to horrible reviews from horny men who couldn't get their rocks off to a queer feminist piece of media. When demographics are not taken seriously or considered in a world that values men, you get situations like this. Women at all levels did not factor into the equation for this studio. Not even when Cody was explicitly telling them to do so. The marketing team only screen tested audiences of 18 to 25-year-old boys, plus people who'd seen Cody's previous work, Juno. They valued a comment card that read, "needs more boobs," over possibly putting in more girls in these screeners to find out who would like this movie.
So there was a test screening that a kid wrote. They said, what would you improve about this film? And the kid wrote, needs more boobs, and spelled boobs B-E-W-B-S. And that was the data that was collected and taken seriously by the people who were marketing the movie.
This predicament can also cause confirmation bias. There's a pervasive thought across entertainment that women can't helm films or be represented on screen because it's going to isolate the male audience if they do. If you take a risk on a film like Jennifer's Body only for it to bomb horribly at the box office, the studio or the reviewers might just confirm their previously held bias on women. In this movie's case, Cody was basically deemed a pariah in the industry after it came out. Even if it had nothing to do with her, Kusama, or Fox for that matter. It was the marketer's job to consider girls. And that is why this movie failed horribly. These consequences of bad marketing are a byproduct of something known as the gender data gap, a term that is used in the book Invisible Women: Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. The gender data gap is said to be a type of unthinking by the top levels of corporations that render women invisible and makes men the default. Whether this is done on purpose or not is a moot point. It doesn't matter. Unthinking is done by most people regardless of your progressiveness. Before we continue, I do want to make a note that many have found this book to contain a lot of TERF rhetoric, if not the author herself being trans exclusionary. Even while I read it, I felt the author did not differentiate sex from gender despite her mentions of this in the preface, as well as being pretty generic in describing a woman's body, making it seem as if there's a default for this too. However, I still want to mention the overall point in this book, as it is important in how it frames the cis, straight, able-bodied man as the default in society. This default, even if the author does not make mention of it, harms trans and non-binary people just as much as cis women. I think we can be critical about the author and her views while still taking away an important point in the bigger picture. Just know that my inclusion of her or this book is not an endorsement of those views. To illustrate this point in the first chapter of her book, Criado Perez asks a seemingly funny question. Is snowplowing sexist? You might laugh at this question at first, like the Swedish government official who posed it did, but once you take a deeper look, the question might give you pause. In the case of the original country, the plowing routes on snowy days prioritized clearing the roads that accommodated cars first and then walkways second. The only problem was that this then caused an influx of minor injuries in the winter, many of which were happening to women, due to the fact of the stereotypical divide that men drive to work and women are more likely to take public transportation. Women would also take more time and travel as well. Because of the designation that women need to take care of the household needs more, which would add on more stops to their public transport routes and increase their chances of falling. After discovering this information, the government decided to change their plow routes. The pedestrian service routes were cleared first, and with this, Injuries in women decreased. And you know what? Even money was saved. And we all know that's all that the government cares about. It took reevaluating a norm of cis-straight male defaulted society to fix what was once a non-issue. Unfortunately, even something as innocuous as snowplowing may not be as gender neutral as we once thought. Or even human neutral, if we're being honest. So many people take public transport. The problem is a lot of companies and the government aren't being as gender neutral as they think they are. The idea of a general audience does not exist in media because general is basically just saying man with extra steps. To many humans, cis-straight able-bodied men are the neutral and everyone else is just kind of like a weird offshoot. Thanks a lot, the Bible. Geez, would it have killed you to have God create Adam and Eve at the same time or something? As someone who is non-binary with boobs, I see this all the time though. Gender-neutral things aren't truly neutral because they're often more geared towards masculine sensibilities. The most prevalent I've noticed is within clothing. While I love myself baggy silhouettes that put less emphasis on my figure and a type of aesthetic for myself that I call little lad core, gender-neutral clothing hardly ever includes more feminine accents or pieces. Androgynous is seen as masculine with no visible chest. Whereas for myself, I am not able to have no chest at the moment. So even if I do present masculine, I am seen as too much of an offshoot to be truly gender neutral because I am a clear deviation from the cis male body. This usually just affects how I feel like I have to present more and more masculine to get across my gender identity, otherwise no one is going to see me as trying to be androgynous, rather than, getting to dress however I would like to dress. This is something I'm sure many other trans and non-binary people out there can relate to as well. In gender-divided products, you also see a similar divide with anything deviating from the often Eurocentric idea of what a man is as the other. Deodorant comes in plain or women's. Teas come in unisex or women's. Basketball is either basketball or women's. Which really just makes me think of that hilarious interview where Michael Che differentiates from the WNBA as if it's a completely different game than basketball.
WNBA, if you're watching this, if you're watching me, first of all, thank you. Second, if you got tickets, I would love to go to a game so I can learn more about your sport and culture.
The sport is basketball.
Well, I mean, it's a different... Yeah, I know about basketball, but I don't
different
like this.
when women dribble, it's different?
It's different. Of course it's different. I think women and men are different, right?
Can you describe their differences?
Well, the ball is smaller, right? And there's no dunks, I know that much.
In each of these, you have what is supposedly a gender-neutral product, while the product for women is seen as the other. In reality, or in a better world, all of these things would just be gender-neutral. They would be for everyone. But in a world where the patriarchy decides how we view anyone outside the norm, the cis male is universal. The default man is a psychological effect that thrives under a system that values one definition of a man, and this thrives even more when unthinking occurs. This is why women are seen as the other, whether it is their intention to do so or not. Our world, for the most part, is still run by these default men, and they can go their entire lives without thinking. In the case of Diablo Cody, the default man, the gender data gap, and just the blatant dismissal of her concerns almost cost her her career. Whether we want to believe society has actually changed on these issues of inclusivity, women and any stereotypical interests they may have are seen as niche because they are niche. This is, by and large, why I argue that demographics matter. Jennifer's Body may have found an audience 10 years after it came out, but why should it have taken that long to realize that the marketing just sucks and not the movie to begin with? The only way that studios or big wigs at the top are going to see that niche audiences are just as enthusiastic to be catered to, they have to get these movies out in front of their eyes at the time they come out, not years after the fact. I think because it is a cult classic now, it just gives more evidence to the fact that women's stories and representation is more needed than ever, especially with encroaching fascism and right-wing political thought creating even more of a gender divide across the world. This is exactly what shoujo and josei manga have been doing in Japan for decades now. The magazines they came from were starting during a time where girls were finally able to go to school, so the beginnings and the renaissance it went through are inherently political and needed. However, like how the default man exists in our society, we carry this into the mediums we consume as well. We cannot separate the art from the society it was baked into. The same level of unthinking can be applied to the demographics of manga. The default shonen, if you will. Shoujo, and even more so josei, are seen as something that is niche. Something that only girls and women can enjoy because they're too frilly and feminine. But shonen and seinen? Those are the default. Those were made for everyone's enjoyment. Despite the fact that this isn't the case at all. Shonen and seinen magazines have specific demographics that they are marketing their series for. But since it's the default, it's applied across all genders. For those who are truly unthinking, shoujo might really be the other, whereas shonen is a universal type of series, which just further fuels the desire to want to get rid of these labels for these demographics. The media made with men in mind is sufficient enough for all audiences. The tendency to see man as the default also shows up in the reading patterns of women as well. You are more likely to read across the aisle and relate to stories with men in mind because, unfortunately, that has just been the default for most of our lives. The typical cis male has always been the default audience, so they've never really had to read something they wouldn't relate to out of fear that they would not be able to engage with media at all, if not. This is why we see so much pushback on female superheroes, queer video game characters, or even just having a black protagonist. They are all deviations of the universal cis-white male that they have never had to force themselves to challenge. So in manga, where shoujo does not adhere to the default and instead sees girls as the default, it's seen as inherently non-universal and niche. Yes, I just said universal. Get over it. Shoujo specifically does not see boys and men as the target audience. Not just that, but they also dare to not even care. If you can't relate to shoujo or engage with it, well, you know what shoujo says to that? That's on you. That isn't to say that shoujo doesn't have stories about boys or men. And in fact, the ones that have male protagonists tend to be the ones that are more palatable in the public eye. For example, My Love Story, Natsume's Book of Friends, Baby and Me, Don't Call It Mystery. These are some of the most beloved and well-respected shoujo series, and it is because they have male protagonists and it's not from the focus of a girl. By now, I am sure you are yelling at me through your screen, saying how demographics are still sexist though. And hey, stop that. Don't yell at me, I'm sensitive, please. But most people will say that demographics are basically divided into action is for boys, romance is for girls. Shonen is cool, shoujo is sweet. Blue section for boys, pink section for girls. However, this in itself is reductive of the demographics by the audience themselves. Sure, the large majority of the most popular shonen series and shoujo series fall into these stereotypes, but these biases don't accurately reflect the demographics. Once again, there are several overlooked factors at play in these statements. The first of which is that most of the most popular shonen series are going to be coming from the magazine Weekly Shonen Jump, especially the ones that get anime adaptations. Shonen Jump is widely known for being an action and gag-oriented manga magazine. With the majority of what's popular coming from it, you would in fact think that all shonen manga are this way. On the flip side, shoujo manga doesn't get as many anime adaptations. I've discussed this at length on the channel before. I'm not gonna get into it here. You can go and watch all 3 of the videos in the trilogy that I have made. In addition though, the shoujo that usually do get picked up for anime are going to be romance series, because these are seen as safe choices that are guaranteed to get the audience to watch. A side effect of unthinking as well in regards to marketing to girls. The thing is, shoujo is so much more varied than people will have you believe. Its variety in genre is actually one of the biggest features of this demographic. In shonen, you mostly have 3 big magazines that readers will flock to and will probably read for most of their lives. Shonen Jump, Shonen Sunday, and Weekly Shonen. Not to be confused with Weekly Shonen Jump, this one's just Weekly Shonen Magazine. This is where a majority of the most popular series come from, with One Piece, Frieren, and Blue Lock respectively. However, according to Rachel Thorne, shoujo magazines are more spread out horizontally, this leading to lower magazine circulations in general for shoujo magazines. Shoujo readers have very specific tastes, and these magazines cater to those specific tastes because they don't believe in a general audience. They want the specific audience that they are targeting. For example, if you're looking for manga that's got more het romance to it, you're probably going to be reading Betsuma magazine. It has the likes of Kimi ni Todoke in it. That's just kind of a taste of the kind of series that would come in there. If you aren't really into ordinary romance manga, then you're going to go over to Hanato Yume, where you'd find something more fantasy, more action, more adventure with the romance in it, like Yona of the Dawn. People looking for historical or drama series are going to be reading Princess magazine, where they can find something like Requiem of the Rose King. Or you'll have a sci-fi lover who's just going to completely not even care about those magazines. They're gonna go read something like Wings, where they can read a series like Empire of Ants, a magazine that would be a niche of a niche of a niche, just for, you know, threes sound better. Demographics aren't inherently sexist. Writing with a target audience in mind is a foundational practice. If there's any sexism, it's a byproduct of the society that we live in. Society. Yet, that doesn't mean that catering media to girls and women or making feminine pieces of art is the root of the problem. In actuality, the root of the problem is that most of these magazines are run by men. I've given this stat before, but I'll say it again. In the book Straight from the Heart by Jennifer Prow, it stated that 99% of the mangaka who make shoujo are women, while 75% of the editors are men. This stat may very well be changing, as an editor from Betsuma magazine said that their staff is closer to 50-50 now. That was back in 2019, I believe that interview was. But it probably is not the case for shonen still. Shonen magazines aren't an inverse. Most of them are solely run and created by men. Shonen Jump wouldn't even hire a female editor back in 2019 and said it was because they couldn't understand the hearts of a boy. Only recently did they hire a female editor on their staff for the Ichino's Family's Deadly Sins, or however you say that series. Shonen or seinen magazines can also be incredibly hostile environments for women or non-binary people who work there. One such case that many people may have heard of by now is with the legendary shoujo mangaka Yu Watase, who is X-gender but still uses she/her pronouns. While she was most known for shoujo series like Ceres and Fushigi Yugi, she wanted to try out making something different, so she started running a series in a shonen magazine called Arata the Legend. What resulted in this was one of the worst experiences of her life, she says. Her work was eventually put on hiatus because of constant belittling and harassment from her editor. She went on record saying that her editor constantly bulldozed all of her ideas, made her redo so many manuscripts even the night before, and just in general made her feel less inspired to create. This case happened with one of the most highly acclaimed modern shoujo mangaka. So other belittlement and harassment cases based on gender in a space that is default cis male wouldn't be hard to surmise. especially when they have more power over, say, fellow employees. Incidents of harassment have also been recounted by female editors at other unnamed shonen magazines, stating that their colleagues in the mangaka they were in charge of would ask them intimate questions about their underwear or other various inappropriate questions so they could have inspiration for their manga. While I haven't heard as many cases of sexual harassment in shoujo magazines, you'll still hear a lot about how editors will shoot down a mangaka's ideas if they don't center around romance, even pushing an author into making more romance-centric series, because if they don't do that, their series might not sell as well. In the case of another renowned shoujo mangaka, Yumi Tamura, she has said she once had to fight her editor on being able to make an action suspense series. Ultimately though, the editor refused and she ended up having to make a sports drama series, which she said completely killed all of her inspiration for a while. Another case of being boxed into making romance for shoujo magazines is with an artist, Yasuko Aoki, the creator of From Eroica with Love. She was pushed into creating more lighthearted romantic series for most of her career, even though she wanted to make something more action-packed and cool. It wasn't until she left her contract work and started doing more freelance that she finally had more freedom to create what she wanted.
最初の頃っていうのはやっぱり言われるがままに
そうですね。
こう書きなさいとか、
はいはい。
漫画を描く作業的にやっていたってこと
そう
で
ですすね。いわゆる学園ラブコメとか、
はいはい
純愛ものとか、
はい
非常に正統的な少女漫画報道でしたんです。
はいはいはい。
Fuyumi Soryo, the creator of Mars, was also feeling super restricted in the shoujo demographic because they wanted her to make more romance series. She has since moved over to seinen magazines where she's felt less restricted on what she gets to create.
少女漫画の方が強制して書いてた感じですね。
元は少女漫画っぽくなかった。
なかったですね。どちらかってそんなふわふわっていう可愛らしい話じゃなくて、えぐみがあるんじゃないかなっていう、平気で人騙したりとか、恋愛面でのちょっとなんていうかね、どちらかサスペンス要素の方が大きいんじゃないみたいな感じの。
悪い感じのストーリーが多いですよね。
そうなんですよ。だからなんでそういう書き方こう冷や水かけるような書き方しちゃうんだって言われちゃうんですけど。それでもだいぶ遠慮して書いてるんですけど、
本当に書きたいものは何なのか。模索する中で生まれた作品がマースでした。これを転機に宗亮さんは青年誌に進出。今自分の書きたかったものを自由に書けるようになったといいます。
It's not that the artists don't want to make shoujo at all. It's mostly that the editors have a strict idea of what girls want. They tamp down the ideas of women and non-binary authors who want to make shoujo series to adhere to a strict version of what they think people want. There are also pay gaps due to shoujo being more looked down on in the industry. An interview with Yumi Tamura basically confirms this. Pay differences between the demographics exist, with shoujo artists taking about half home of what a page rate for a shonen mangaka would be. Tamura continues by stating that shoujo's place in manga is different and complex, which makes her feel better. These are direct ramifications of seeing shoujo as a stepping stone before it began to blossom into what it is now. The value of shoujo is seen as inherently less than, and therefore the women who make them are seen that way too. The default shonen and stereotypes on shoujo manga are two key components of this whole argument, but there's one more thing that I want to talk about. Jazz music.
You know, I just think that people, when they say that they, hate jazz, they don't have context. They don't know where it comes from.
Stick with me here, because this may sound convoluted as hell, but once I explain more, your third eye is going to be opened. I was watching a video on YouTube recently by Adam Neely called Is Loewe Jazz? And as a Loewe fan and jazz fan myself, I was curious about this question. By the end, I weirdly found myself comparing a lot of Adam's talking points about jazz music to shoujo manga. In his video, the main topic is to discuss whether or not Loewe is making jazz music and if she should be considered the savior of the dying genre, questioning if she's finally bringing the gatekept genre of jazz to the public. Adam's argument is that Loewe is not jazz because she's not bringing in key elements that make jazz, well, jazz. She might be making references to jazz music, but to Adam, he considers her to be more of mid-century pop music. Jazz, to him, is just as much of a culture as it is a genre, which he explains.
But I want to talk about this in a slightly different light. You know, genre is more than just the sound of the music. It's also, at the bottom, the culture and the community of people that make the music and listen to the music and talk about the music. And then also at the top, it's the institutions that promote the music, that market the music, and then present the music in live performance situations.
Adam also references another video by Patrick Bartley, where he discusses how jazz festivals use the word jazz even though they often don't have many, if any, jazz musicians that are headlining these festivals. Here, Patrick asked a question that got me thinking.
Scream gatekeeping. Like, you're gatekeeping as soon as you say, well, why can't this be jazz? So it's like, well, if you're going to ask the question, why can't this be jazz? Why does it have to be jazz? Why do you need that word? Is there something about the word that just sounds cool?
A sentiment I think I've been yelling at our shoujo for a while now. Something people love to do is say that a shonen or seinen series that girls like too is an honorary shoujo, even though the series is in fact not a shoujo. They cling to the word shoujo without any of the history, context, or culture behind it because the word itself is more special than the demographic. Why people do this while also claiming that demographics don't matter is beyond me. You would think that claiming any series with a female protagonist or some romance in it as a shoujo is just as sexist as what they say the demographics are, but I digress. I did say that this argument gets people heated, and I am not going to say I am immune to it. While demographics in manga do not equate to book genres, I have, over the years, started to find myself seeing them more as art genres that kind of fill different demographic niches. Much like jazz, shoujo can also be categorized as a genre in the overall medium of manga. One where the art and genre can be varied, but still has more of a through line because demographics still have very clear distinctions. Shoujo could be just as much defined by its conventional artistic and narrative qualities as any other kind of genre of music, art, or decor. These qualities are closer to what defines shoujo outside of just being a demographic, not the genre of romance. The artistic choices and narratives of this medium of manga are ones I've talked about on multiple occasions, and I discuss more in depth in my History of Shoujo video. Here, I'm only going to briefly break down 3 of the biggest factors to it without getting too into the details. So if you're wanting a full breakdown, check that other video out for more. I truly just can't make this video any longer than it already is. In shoujo, there is a focus on more emotional storytelling with narratives that center human relationships. This doesn't just mean romance, despite how people usually take it to mean that. Relationships don't start and end with romance. The emotional narratives center on things like friendship, sisterhood, rivalries, or prejudice. You'll find stories that turn inwards to the self and explore all factors of how a character is feeling. To complement the storytelling, shoujo art is often very stylistically unique and emphasizes atmosphere and mood over form. Line work may be more wispy with less attention to detail, so it can convey the emotions of a scene. Screen tones with bubbles, sparkles, or other dreamlike qualities are also usually used in shoujo art. Once again, this is to outwardly visualize how characters are feeling in a moment without using words. The artistic style doesn't equate to every artist though, but it is a major identifier of the shoujo style. Lastly, panels in shoujo are also free-flowing and less strict about keeping a rigid box format. Rather than clear visual lines that guide your eye from one panel to another, shoujo artists will guide your eye around the page in waves, even using the atmospheric screen tones as the guiding lines that connect panels together. This style of atmosphere over form has made many critics call shoujo stateless, and is also used less when a shoujo artist moves to other manga magazines too. Just like jazz music, you are bound to find people who will disagree with you on these qualitative traits. You might even find someone saying that a series that doesn't have these qualitative traits shouldn't fit into shoujo then. Unlike music though, shoujo is both a demographic and an art genre. It's because the editors of that magazine specifically asked themselves what the girls who are reading it wanted, and that is why that series is in that magazine. Shoujo mangaka Nao Iwamoto discusses how her less than fluffy shoujo artwork still constitutes her as a shoujo artist in an interview with Naoki Urasawa.
っていうのと、少女漫画っていうフィールドは、案外相入れないとこがあって、でなんかこう見てると、ちゃんと少女漫画のところはきちんとブレずに抑えてる感じがするんですよ。やっぱり少女漫画であるっていうことはちゃんと確立したいっていう意識はあるんですか？
あります。完全に、もう女の子に向けて描いているので、漫画って私は、なのでやっぱりその女の子が好きだなと思う範囲で、絵も話も描きたいなと思ってて。
It is because she is always thinking about the target audience of women who are going to be reading her series. The fact that shoujo magazines where these manga originate from require a level of thinking about the girls and women who read these manga means that it is basically impossible to make them invisible. While it may also be true that the men in power in these editorial positions don't really care about shoujo as a whole and see it as less than, the girls who read these magazines still wield power on them as well. They are the ones sending feedback about what they want to be reading, and they're also the ones that are going to be buying the series that they want to read. These girls hold the purchasing power. It's just unfortunate that the businesses uphold the sexism that turns it into a cycle of never-ending stereotypes. Still though, the level of thinking about an actual audience of girls and women is an absolute force of nature that you probably couldn't find in a lot of other mediums. Much like Patrick Bartley, I'm also asking myself why people so desperately need the word shoujo. And not in the way of saying, oh, we don't need demographics, but why do you need the word shoujo to describe a series you like? Is it because you don't fully want to admit your gap of support for series that were actually made by and for women? Does it just make you feel better that a shonen you like is called a shoujo because that means it was intended for you? Or are you possibly just so stuck on the fact that shoujo is romance that you couldn't possibly think that boys and men could like romance too? It's not even like here in America Judd Apatow didn't make a whole industry on male-dominated romance movies that essentially killed the chick flick. If you claim to read whatever is good and you don't think demographics matter, then why is it always the honorary shoujo that get the acclaim? Why are they the ones that are propped up as saving the dying shoujo genre? I really just think that people outside of Japan, and let's be honest, people inside Japan too,
慣れない少女漫画なんで、たくさん研究しようと思って読んでるうちですね、なんかずーっと夜中中夢中になって読んでて、これ完全に恋愛漫画の術中にはまってるだけなんじゃないかって気がしましてね。
just have no context for shoujo at this point. Like I have already said, there is just a limited scope of how demographics are viewed around the world that has just constricted people on how we view them. It's been happening since shoujo first began, and it persists even now, because despite what people may think, demographics are not inherently sexist. society is. Shoujo may be on the decline at the moment, but that is just because it has been devalued more and more as the years go by. While we have been getting more shoujo anime adaptations in the past 3 or 4 years, they still hardly find the same success, the same budget, or the same praise as any of their shonen counterparts. This has also contributed to lower manga sales and lower magazine sales, contributing to lower pay to shoujo artists and continuing the cycle of seeing shoujo as a niche, inferior medium to the default shonen. So, with everything I said, I will end my argument on why demographics matter with this thought experiment. There was a video by Yara Zaid where she too talks in length about the terrible marketing around Jennifer's body. In this, she brought up something I found really funny. What if we lived in a parallel universe where Jennifer's body and Mean Girls were marketed in the exact same way? Instead of showing off the comedy in the trailer for Mean Girls, we mostly just get shots of Rachel McAdams' legs or Lindsay Lohan's boobs. I now ask the same question of you. In a parallel universe where shoujo no longer exists, where demographics have been erased, would a manga like Sailor Moon look the exact same way that it does now? Would a manga that is unabashedly feminine and frilly, that specifically targeted an audience of 8 to 15-year-old girls, even have been developed in a world where men who are in charge weren't forced into thinking about an underrepresented audience? Maybe you're even thinking right now, well, it shouldn't be so feminine because then it would isolate the audience of young boys. But to that I ask once again, do you view shoujo as a niche and shonen as the universal? In a perfect world, we would not need demographics. Boys would be reading across the aisle in the exact same way as everyone else has had for decades now. All kinds of underrepresented groups would get to make whatever kind of media they would like to make and not have to care about the unrealistic general audience to actually be taken seriously in the art they create. Yet, we do not live in this world. I would argue even further, we will never live in this world with the constant dismissal and pushback of anything seen as too feminine. I'll often be told that to sell well, shoujo just needs to be less girly, less shoujo. Yet, I just think we need to stop seeing manga as a medium as shonen by default.